Funded by the Community Radio Fund of Canada.
Hello, and welcome to our four-part podcast series featuring the Homalco First Nation and our sister nations from Homalco, Vancouver Island, and the surrounding coastal areas. I am Eric Wilson. I am joined today by Robert Harry, Darren Blaney, and Dominic Fody. This is episode 3, where we're going to be talking about the adaptation over the past century, a reflection on how these communities navigated and adapted over the last century, highlighting resilience, innovation, and key milestones. Let's begin with question 1. What were some of the key turning points for the Homalco people in the 20th century?
I guess for me, when I look back on it, there's in Church House. This will be mostly about Church House. When we were in Church House, there was a guy named Thompson. He was the kind of the teacher in Church House, and he realized that the surveys of Church House Reserve was off, and he was living in the school that our people built, and the people were pretty upset with him because there was, the schools at that time were a big school and a big class and a small class. And he shut down one of the classrooms and opened up a store and post office there. And our people wanted to charge him rent of about $10 a month there. But they told him it wasn't his school. But when he realized the survey didn't include where the school was, didn't include the cemetery, he went and preempted land, and in those days, you needed 3 years to preempt. You had to be living on the land for 3 years, and then you can preempt it. So he applied for preemption, and he got 160 acres. And at that time, a church house was only 25 acres, and there was like 125 people living on 25 acres, and they were asking for expansion. And then Thompson got all that land, and our people went back and forth to New Westminster trying to fight for that land. And at that time, they said Homalco spent about $1,500 in early 1900s to try to get that land back. And so that kind of took a while to get the land back. It wasn't until they mentioned about the cemeteries, 2 cemeteries there. The one right down what they used to call Arthur's Wharf there. I guess Arthur is a guy that took over the store after, and his name was Oth. Lots of good stories about Oth. And but anyways, it was lost to Homalco for a while, and I think it took a while for us to start getting our land back. The cemetery and the school and another cemetery right down by the water there. So that was the early days of Church House.
Wow. Fascinating.
Arthur Pendergast.
Arthur Pendergast, yeah. Used to call him Oth.
Cool. Oth's Wharf.
Yeah.
Is there anything else about key turning points in the 20th century for Homalco?
There's one story I remember very clearly was before 1953, before they changed the Indian Act. The old Indian Act was part of the Constitution of Canada. In that Constitution, they had stated that they categorize different things all the way down, and when they come to us as Native people, they had us in the same bracket as the cattle. And in 1953, it changed. And once that changed to a process that we started having a little more power, a little more understanding, and it was, I think, that started the change of people feeling good about themselves rather than like an animal. So that was my impression of the changeover.
I see.
I think there's one other one. I think that in 1951, there was a end isolation policy from the government trying to relocate remote First Nations communities. And that hit our people really hard because from 1951, I think, until about 1970, there was no homes built in Church House.
Really?
And they were trying to force us out of there. And I think that really set our people back. That in 1972, my uncle was talking about how, 1970, there was a rich guy from California that wanted to build us a resort in Old Church House. He was going to basically give us $300,000. And at that time, the Indian agent said we didn't have the capacity to run a resort. And I think, and that kind of went against the end isolation policy. If we had an economy there, then we would probably stay there. And then I think so we didn't get the resort. But in 1969 was the Davis Plan that cut off all of our fishing licenses. So we didn't have any fishing licenses after that went through. There was only 2 licenses left, and that was Charlie Francis and Ambrose Wilson that kept their licenses. And so we didn't have any fishing licenses after they moved to Sliammon. And then in 1985, the school was no longer feasible. And was kind of funny because they started studying Homalco for the hydro project. They started studying it back there, and I looked at the report. There's no mention of Homalco in that hydro study because it felt like we didn't exist. And so the last one in Church House was my Uncle Jim, and he lived in Heber Joseph's house, the yellow house there. And that was the last Homalco person living there. And everybody moved out of there, and I think that was just a huge disruption of our community. Prior to that, our people would all be, we were pretty consistent about bathing in the river. But once we moved out of there to Paul River, Vancouver, and Campbell River, our people stopped bathing in the river, and I think that really was a pretty big blow to our community. And now it's just starting to make a comeback, bathing in the river, spiritual baths. I think we're starting to find our footing. I think it's taken a long time for us to feel comfortable here, especially with our neighbors that are really, talking to my friend Bob Chamberlain, he says they really know how to make you feel unwelcome. So, and that's, the other thing about our people was that, you heard about the generosity every time you went there. And that's why Auth was so famous there, because he would take advantage of that generosity and practically eat at every house. And so, yeah, he was quite a character.
I bet. I think one of the more recent things, too, that's a big change or shift is the getting the reserve here in Campbell, because with that end isolation policy and the kind of like Church House becoming unlivable was about 20 years, as I understand it, where Homalco really didn't have a reserve that people lived at. About 20 years where everyone was just leaving Church House. And up until 95 when we got the reserve here, of really just people moving all over. And I think getting a home and a reserve that we've been building up has been really important for our development and our continuation as a people.
I think the other thing after we left Church House was under the Indian Act, you couldn't vote unless you lived on reserve. And in those days, it was probably my Uncle Jim, Auntie Nora that lived on reserve. So we didn't have a government for a while. And I remember your dad, Jimmy Wilson, talking to me about that. He said people wanted him to be a chief at that time. But we were in SFU that time. He was studying music, and that's when Richard became chief. And I think that time really we lost a lot of years in terms of advancing our people because our funding kind of went under the Desolation Sound Tribal Council, and that really benefited La'am, and Homalco didn't really get any benefit from that after, and same with Clahus didn't get any benefit. La'am got the majority of the benefits from the Desolation Sound Tribal Council. And I remember when I think I got into council about 93, and I remember hearing that Homalco had to pay $35,000 to get out of the tribal council. Even though we hardly got anything out of the tribal council, we had to pay to get out of there. So it felt like we were a hostage there or something. So that was kind of funny.
Yeah, I bet. How did the Indian Act affect Homalco people?
Controlled us.
Control.
I think the Indian Act was pretty overbearing. And I often refer to, it's kind of funny because it's, when I lived in Church House with my grandparents, my Auntie Mavis wanted to come here to Campbell River to babysit, get a babysitting job. And she couldn't do it until she got a permission from the Indian agent. So that was that kind of control that was on our people. And I think it went beyond that because our people were, every time a plane came in, it was probably a white person from Indian Affairs, and they came to fix our problems. So they became like experts. So every time our people looked at a white person, it almost felt like they almost started to think they were smart or experts and stuff. I remember when Ray Bellows first came around, everybody was all in awe of him. And he was a cook, and everybody was amazed at what he was doing. He was, that became an internalized thing on us that we couldn't fix ourselves. It had to be somebody coming in to help us fix us. And I think that kind of took away some of that initiative, some of that belief in ourselves. We became dependent on the government to fix stuff for us. And I think that's kind of what you see in our community today is there's still some of that lingering where people rely on somebody to fix it for them.
I see.
When before that, it was our people just did it. They just went and did. They built the homes, they built the church, they built the school. All of this stuff they did on their own. But they became dependent once Indian Affairs came in.
How did Homalco members maintain cultural practices in spite of systemic oppression?
How did we maintain cultural practices?
Yeah.
I guess for me, when I look at what I call a practical culture, that's smoking fish and how we prepared our smoked fish, how we prepared barbecue salmon, clams, and all those things they needed in order to survive the long winters. Those were all in place. But after, I think after the Catholic Church came and said, we'll give you the remedy for smallpox. Your dad told me about that. He said they asked for, they said they would give us the remedy for smallpox if we became Catholics. And then, so we became Catholics, but we had to do away with all our songs and dances. That's why the culture group is so important today, is we're taking it back, and you can see the pride and culture starting to come back. There was a sense of, once the church got there, it kind of put some order to how people lived. It kind of, they had kind of watchmen, and I remember my uncle was telling me about my grandparents were drinking in their house, and it was all the curtains were closed, but there's people in the community that were kind of like watchmen for the church, and they had to apologize to the community for drinking. And then they were talking about how my uncle said one time Ambrose had to be up there on front of the whole community during church, and he had to have his arms out. It felt like an elementary school punishment, but he had to leave his arms up for the whole duration of the mass and stuff. And I think the Indian Act really did a lot of damage to our people. It really broke us down, and all that initiative our people had got broken down. And I think our people are now finding their confidence, and their strength is coming back, or they can be something. You can be educated and you can go do something, and all these things are really starting to, you start to see it coming through again now. And I think we're at a different time now. I think we've moved beyond what happened in Church House and the Indian Act. We're really taking control of our territory. We have a bigger say in what happens in our territory. We have a bigger influence, and some of that is the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. Our government is being recognized now, and I think that's given us a lot more leverage to negotiate economic opportunities for ourselves. Before, we didn't have that. I remember we used to talk to Interfor, and the forestry company, and they always came in like there was nothing we can do about the forests. They were taken out of our territory. We only kind of were begging for little bits of logging, and then we got a logging company, and then even at that, it was still controlled by Interfor, what contracts they would give you. Other companies were the same. Now we have a lot more say in what happens in our territory.
Awesome.
Speaking to that question, I think one of the ways that practices survive or beliefs, I see them, these big ideas that are shared across people, across families. These really strong ideas of, and certain ideas hold on stronger than others. Beliefs around like superstitions hold on really, really strongly. Superstition belief, like owls, beliefs around owls, that owls kind of, they're scary. They kind of symbolize something bad is going to happen.
Death.
They represent death, right? And or the fact that there's a belief around, and Bill talked about it earlier, witchcraft, like witch doctors, and there was a belief, Mateusum,
Yes.
somebody taking something from your body and they could use it against you to control you, is one of the beliefs. And some people, believe it. even like my granny, she says, it says it's kind of like a superstition, but she still sometimes believes it, even though she feels like it might not be true. When I was moving out I was living with somebody, and I was moving out. I was calling her and I was cleaning up, and she said, make sure you clean everything. Make sure you don't leave a hair in the house. Yeah, I knew why, right? Because she didn't want like, I was in a bad living situation, and she didn't want that to happen to me. Even though she kind of jokes about it, she says it's kind of silly, but she still acts like it's possible. So the superstitions are quite strong. But also, yeah, certain beliefs, things that, like, one of the things that I found that I learned early on from the creation story and how we come from dogs. And then you look at you see it in some of the other recordings, and you hear people say, like, this belief of almost disbelief of that, and kind of like one of the big conflicts of belief that I saw was, or I was told, is so in the Bible, where people came to be taught from, dogs are viewed as pitiful, kind of dirty animals. And that's our creation story, is that we come from dogs, right? So one of the difficult things that you kind of see is just this really strong conflict in those ideas. We come from dogs, but dogs are pitiful, and kind of dirty creatures. And that's one instance where I guess the religion that we came to fall under and our culture kind of clash. But there are elements that people also found more commonalities with. And I think that's one of the reasons why it does still feel quite strong. Religious beliefs feel quite strong, is because certain cultural things can be adapted to fit under a religious umbrella, and vice versa, where religious things can become cultural as well. Yeah.
I think there's when I think about the people that knew about the medicines and them being called witches, that really killed off all of our use of our medicines. And those people that held the knowledge, really, the church really made it like they were evil people. And I think we lost a lot of information in that time. I remember my dad always had a kind of a boil on his neck, and Talisa, she brought some medicine and put it on his neck, some pitch, put it on his neck, and then wrapped it with a cloth, and it healed that boil on his neck, and he never got it again. So those kind of things I think we lost in kind of defining people as witches. And I remember Bonnie used to talk about her mom, that she knew some of those medicines and stuff like that. So I think that's something we're going to have to work on, maybe comparing notes with other nations to get that knowledge back. I think it's important for us to, because it's connecting us back to the land and our kind of how we're closely connected to the land and how we know the different medicines that are available in our land. And I think there's going to be a time when we start to understand all the medicines you're getting from like you look at the elders, they got big pill boxes and stuff, and they kind of, some of those pills clash, so it makes them worse. So talking to this young guy, and he said they're learning all the medicines and how they can start helping to mitigate some of their own elders in that process. And I think there's some opportunities in our territory for sure.
There's a lot that gets lost in translation when you speak from English to Ayajutham. Like that idea, there's no word for witch in the language. In fact, I think the word for witch, or what we call in English a witch or a shaman, actually translates, it's like a holy person, right? Holy, I can't remember the word for it, but it's like, it has that, it means holy person, or in the stories, like I think Thonch, the woodpecker, he's a woodpecker, or robin is a shaman, and it is very, that's just, yeah, we don't have a word for it, for that witchcraft. It's not witchcraft in the language. There's things like that get lost in translation, or get maybe misconstrued, or intentionally or accidentally. When you go from Ayajutham to English, certain things become more negative, sound more negative, or even sometimes too, I find this, that some things sound so silly to say in English, but they sound, when you translate it, and it's like really unfortunate, because what you can say has so much meaning. That's one of the beliefs, is that what you say has so much power, and that's why it's important to watch what you say. And that all stems from, like, this morning I was looking at some of the notes from John Davis, and you always hear about Quaigan, Emot Quaigan, is your mind. But I also saw one of the elders in the 70s, Mary George from Flamen, translate it to heart. Emot Quaigan, not just your mind, but your heart. And two, this Quaigan, in my opinion, in my view, it comes from Quai, to talk. So Quai, it's all like how you speak, how your heart is, and how your mind is all connected. And I think that's something over and over the language kind of is really important to learning how we thought and what we believed, because when you talk about it in English, so much of the meaning is lost, or so much of the meaning, it sounds like we're talking about something else when we're talking about this, right?
Yeah.
That witchcraft, these things that it's a different idea when you talk about it in the language.
For sure.
I was compared to when you're speaking in the language and you take a can of pop. When you're in the language, it's got all that fizz in it. But when you translate it in English, it's like stale. Yeah. Drinking stale pop. Yeah.
No one likes flat pop.
Yeah.
How did relocation from Church House to Campbell River impact the nation socially and culturally?
It's a good question. I wasn't part of it. I was already out of there. So moving from your own home is where you were born. It's got to be traumatic.
And around when did you move away from there?
I moved away when I was 3.
Wow.
But I kept coming back for the summer between boarding schools, residential schools. My mom had to go to Stephen to support us after my dad died. So she worked in the cannery there.
Wow.
I guess for me, when we moved from Church House I lived in Vancouver for a while, but Church House was always home. And now that I'm here in Campbell River, it feels like I live here in Campbell River because Church House is home.
Yeah.
But I think for our people, I think there was the huge disruption that happened in Church House when we moved out of there to Campbell River. I think it was the biggest one I could see is the spiritual baths. Like in that storybook that Charles talked about, it was really enforced that you go bath in the river when your voice change. You got to go to the river. And I think our people really, really upheld that in Church House. When I got here, I came home to Campbell River and started living here. And my sons, my uncle's sons, Ralph and Matt, that's when we lost Susie. And so went and found the creek behind their house so they could go bath in the river. Took them there in the morning, every morning, and we kind of dug out a little thing and made it a little deeper back there. But it felt like people were asking me to take their kids to the river. And it got lost somewhere. What would be done in the river, what would be done in the bathing, and that's why I was grateful for your dad, Jimmy, came and talked to me a lot about bathing in the river, and so I think it's important that we get back to that. And the reason I think it's bathing in the river is in our creation story, the vision quest is in our creation story, is that we maintain that part of who we are because we get our spirit guides from bathing in the river. And I think we've drifted away enough that we don't have vision quests anymore. And I'd be grateful for the day when somebody does a vision quest. Be grateful for the day when somebody does the Kajayan. There's a story about that in what I heard is that the ones up high in the mountain are the most potent ones. The ones down, like on the way to Orford, there's little creek there. And Ambrose said they used to get Kajayan from there. And they would use that. And I think that's what they used when they had to paddle somewhere. Maybe our canoe journey can try that out sometime. Put it on your arms and one day get down in an IMO. I think those things are. I remember talking to, of course, your brother, Mikey, was talking to me about it, and he said he got to try it. And I thought that was pretty neat that he did that, because we need more people to do that. It's poisonous, so we have to figure it out. So maybe go through the trial and error again, but you can't take too much. And I think those things, that part of our who we were is missing. And I think the generosity you can see is still there, but it's getting lost as well. People don't feed you as much as they used to. I think those things are important.
Very important.
That we are generous people.
Yeah. I'm sorry, go ahead.
One of the other ways that I think the adaptation that when we talk about the river bathing, and with that, one of the things that broke that down too was the residential schools, but my granny, she's talked to me about how it's the practice of doing something like that. It doesn't have to be the river. It could be the salt chuck out on the beach. You go out to the beach, you go into the ocean. But even if you don't have the ocean near you, you could take a cold shower or even just splash your face. Some people do, right, with cold water. But it's the practice and it's the prayers that are the most powerful part of it. And that's one way I think that people kind of took these and brought them with them, even though they were taken away from their home. And I'm sorry. I was trying to think. You mentioned. It slipped my mind. We can keep going.
That's okay.
I think there's, when you mentioned other, my when I was in residential school, my grandmother would write me letters when I was in Seashelt. So there was no rivers around Seashelt Residential School. So I get up early and walk along the beach and find a place to go bath in the ocean.
Yeah.
So I used to do that. And then I got to Mission. I bathed in real shallow little creek. Wet one side, flip over, wet the other side, and then because I couldn't go in the Fraser River, it was too dangerous. So my grandmother just eventually just told me to take a cold shower. But I think the other part of that you kind of remind me of is the if you can't do those sohothot, it's called, cleansing yourself. You can do that by stepping out of your house. And she said you take all your whatever stresses, worries, you blow it and you give it to the wind. And to me, that's kind of when I was in psychology, when I first got to Langara, I was thinking, oh, my grandmother kind of knows this stuff. It was the visualization and letting go of some of your suffering, letting go of some of your frustrations and regrets. But she really emphasized the creating good habits. We couldn't get lazy. Those were some really bad habits to get into, and you had to work hard, you had to work fast, and really more emphasizing that in the grieving time, because you had to be like my Auntie Mavis said, when she lost her husband, she wasn't allowed to get mad. So she stayed off social media. But I think once you emphasize your good habits, you build on your good habits, that sets you off in a good direction. I think that's important for our people to have that kind of that focus on trying to be more having all the good habits, hard work, getting up early, and not be getting angry all the time because you get stuck in there. What you meant by stuck in there was it becomes a habit. And it's harder to change a habit over to a good habit at some point.
Definitely. Very difficult.
That was one of the things that I was told too in grieving, is that it is an opportunity to build good habits. It's actually really, really important in that grieving process to do that for yourself, because like you say, you get stuck into bad habits and bad ways of being. It's not just a loss, but it's also an opportunity, and opportunity to better yourself.
It's a new beginning.
Yeah.
Definitely. I agree. When did Homalco members stop attending residential schools, and what was the impact when the residential schools closed and survivors were sent back to the community?
I think I heard my great-grandfather went in around 1875, and he didn't get out till about maybe around 1890. And he was only a few years old, and he came back and brought a lot of his abuse home with him. And he abused our family members. And I think a lot of other families went through the same experience. And I think the last one was probably in the 80s in Mission, around 1985 or so. That when St. Mary's shut down.
86.
But some of them did go to Kamloops, eh? Your brother Donald went there. Yeah.
And the old school in Mission too. There's
Yeah.
2 different schools in Mission.
Yeah. Yeah. But to me, I when I look at it, is when they were traumatized, they just went into survival mode. And survival mode meant probably drinking, a lot more drinking, try to get over their abuse, especially for the ones that were sexually abused. It's I don't know if it ever goes away. And you look at all the people that I went to school with, and they were abused. I was just really lucky to have sidestepped all that. I didn't get abused sexually in residential school, so I came out with less baggage and luggage to clear off. A lot of people have a lot more to work through, and I feel really. I've attended a few hearings for people wanted me to kind of witness their hearings from residential school, and it was just painful to even to witness them talking about what happened to them. It was can't imagine what that feels like as a kid. And when you're a kid and somebody violates you like that, your self-worth takes a beating, your boundaries take a beating, and it just kind of sets you off on a path, kind of like the bad habits thing we talked about, when we don't even know what we're dealing with. When kids are supposed to be looking at a priest like they're God's person, and then they're abusing you like that, that just creates so much conflict in somebody's brain to comprehend that. So I think I look at some of the friends I had that I went to a school with, and they're all gone. They're all gone, basically. And there's only a few people left that went to school with. So, and all that trying to bury the pain is really just taking them away. And it's, their body couldn't hold it anymore. And eventually they just got sick.
One of the things that, I was abused more often than I wanted to think about. But there's a process that they did to you. If you didn't let them abuse you, they would beat you up. I mean, sexual abuse you. You get hurt by them. So you become very submissive, and you just lie there and just took whatever they gave you. And that was the mentality I had for the longest time when I got out. I was so tender. I was so chicken shit of everything. Then I started working at a pulp mill in Paul River, back below. And I started to find out I was just as smart as everybody else. And I was just as good an athlete as everybody else. And then I started to absorb that in my body, in my mind. And that the pain is still with me with all the abuses. But I feel confident now that it's behind me, even though I'll remember it. But I'm going to move forward, which I have done. And I feel good about myself today. And every one of us was so traumatized going through all that garbage, it was hard. And so we didn't read what was on there. We just wanted to get out of there really fast, and we signed it off. And in the document, without any of us knowing about it, that you cannot go after physical abuse. And we signed off on it.
Oh.
Yeah. So I'm still working on now, 20 years later. But yeah, people don't agree with my religious beliefs. That's for them, not for me.
Yeah, and that's okay.
Yeah, I know. I've had people asking me if we're going to build a church. And I sort of think about it, I try to be respectful to them that believe in it. And I know there's people that believe in it. Maybe it helps them. Just as I say, I sobered up in my way, and there's lots of other ways to sober up, lots of other ways to bring healing and stuff. And who knows where people get help. But I think what I've tried to explain to people is if we do get anything that comes close to a church, because you only use it one day a week. if it's even active every week. And so I say to them is we'll have to build something that suits our people, that we can have more uses for the building. And it's hard. It's hard when I know some people that are really hurt by it. And they didn't. The church is pretty guilty. I mean, the Catholic Church is really tough one to lock down because they say this church is independent from this church, and they wouldn't compensate First Nations people like the Anglican Church did, and because they have all somehow become independent of each other. Even if you look in Rome, where all this wealth is from all the church and all the church's collections and stuff. And I was pretty disappointed when I heard in Winnipeg there was supposed to be some kind of fundraising to help survivors. And they got a court order that they had to give survivors like $30 million. And then they said they can only raise $2 million. So they went back to the court and got it changed. And then for some reason they were raising money to build a church. And they raised $27 million to build a church. So that was pretty frustrating to hear that. And, if you really wanted to be following your religion, then, you help those in need, and they caused the damage.
Yeah.
Because, my life was, there was a friend of mine I worked with for about 8 years, and we were planning to go to law school. We were going to be lawyers. And he got abused by Arthur Plint, and I had no idea. He came back to work, and he was suicidal. And he attempted suicide, so I went to see him. And then I thought he was okay. And then a month later, he tried again. And he basically killed his brain. He was on life support. And after that, I kind of gave up on the idea of being a lawyer. And I got involved in politics in the community, so it kind of changed my life in a couple different ways. But who else's potential has been taken away by residential school? You take a look at all our people, their potential is all. When you have people that only want to drink, as I did when I left residential school, that's all I wanted to do was drink. And now we have a state of emergency. We've lost 4 young people, and they were slave to their addictions. They didn't get to live a life with all their potential. What could they have been, if they had not been part of intergenerational trauma? So we have a lot of people that are like that don't get to live a life that they should choose. But it takes a lot of work to heal. I remember thinking about it. Biggest realization I came to was there's no Calvary coming to save me. I have to do this work. And that was probably a turning point for me in terms of healing all these different things where I was impacted by residential school. And eventually I got through it and got the work done. But some people never realize that they have to heal. Yeah. All this chaos becomes normal, and they never realize that they should be sober. So that's the hard part.
Definitely.
One of those things that we talked about was the $2 million and Chief was talking about. Yet in the Vatican, there's a chair there made of gold worth $40 million.
Wow. How did Homalco begin to regain control over education, governance, and economic development?
Well, I think the court cases that were going through at the time, all the way back to Calder, when our rights was confirmed that we have Aboriginal rights. And then after that was the Dalgamu case that gave us even more, made our rights stronger. Then the Haida case made our rights stronger. So our influence over the territory and how we can, like one of the things that I often bring up is that in the Dalgamu case, it says an inescapable economic component. Our rights in our territory, the resources, there's an inescapable economic component that any company coming to your territory should have to contend with, figure out how to negotiate that with the First Nations. And then from the revenues from your territory, because we started getting revenue sharing. So for us in Homalco, there was a bit of an education fund there for people going to post-secondary. And I think that was really limited. Like when I was early on in university, I think I used to get like $460 a month. And Faye and I were both in college at the time. But I was too busy drinking. I didn't learn properly. I mostly got C minuses and stuff. But we lived on that. And I think for us, we are now, at one point we had 26 students, even though the government only funded eight students. So we are going beyond it to make sure we're investing in our young people, that they can get educated, and it'll come back and benefit us at some point. But at least somebody that's getting educated also has a chance at their life. And I think, I guess the other part of our, what I call our, there's a lot of nations that will talk sovereignty. They want to be sovereign, that they have self-government and stuff like that. But when you are depending on the government for handouts, writing proposals and grants, you are not independent, you are not sovereign. So for us, we have to, that's what the hydro offers us, is an opportunity to be able to be decision makers in our own lives. Other than that was in the Indian agents' hands to make a decision about our lives. We couldn't really make decisions about ourselves. So I think for us to start to build up an economy where, like I used to say to the people in the province, if I want to build a camping platform in Church House, I can just make a decision and we will build a camp platform in Church House. We don't have to write a grant. I don't have to go buy lumber at an auction to build it. Our community should just have that ability to make the decision based on the resources in our territory. And I think we will be able to, at some point, start taxing. We will be the tax collectors in our territory. If they want to respect our government, that's what we said about the hydro. If you want to respect our government, BC collects taxes for schools, roads, hospitals, and their government. I said, we have a government as well. We have housing issues, we have social issues, and we have stewardship over our territory. We have to look after all those things, and we need to be tax collectors. So I think we're getting there. It's coming. I could see it coming pretty soon. And when the hydro comes, we were talking about $40 million a year in taxes that the government, provincial government, would have taken. But we're saying we're taking that so that we can be decision makers for our people. We can help out our people as they need. Mm-hmm. So it's exciting times for us.
One of the things that we also did last year, during the my first year in term with this chief and council, was we made our own decision who's a Homalco member. Mm-hmm. We're not going to go by the Indian Act, like we have. We have 5 or 6 that we adopted in a sense, mm-hmm. Into our community, into the Homalco First Nation, and so they're now schooling. They get on the Christmas thing, we give them a certain amount of money, so they get it now. So we're trying to bring everybody back together again. And the process we're using is just UNDRIP is one of them, where it says we have the right to say who our members are. We're also building. We're starting to get more housing coming in, and we know that there's a lot of people out in the community of Sechelt, Slam, and Plahus who want to come back. We've already had one or two applying to come back to Homalco because they're born Homalco, so they're coming back. So it's the process of having good government, a lot of good people helping you, a lot of people supporting you, and not only from the community, but from the outside too. So we do have some good partners out there that are helping us, our economy grow. Mm-hmm. And it's a good thing because we respect them, they respect us, and the trust issue is there. And the biggest thing that you have to have is trust. They trust us, we trust them.
Yes, I agree, definitely. How did the relationships between Homalco and the Canadian government evolve over the last 100 years?
Well, I think even going back to Thompson, taking our school and stuff like that, I think we've had to fight to try to get our land back. The road right-of-way in Orford was a big loss for Homalco. Mm. That's when they came and said to Homalco, the Indian agent came, had a BCR and said, we're going to take this road. We'll give you $5,000. If you don't take it, you get nothing. That was Canada. And my Uncle Herman was there, and he said, well, what if we lease it to you? And they said, no lease, you take $5,000 or you get nothing. And then it became, they got the one councillor member there that signed that BCR, but they didn't have quorum. They had one chief and two councillors. The chief and another council member went off to fish in Rivers Inlet, so they weren't there. So that BCR was illegal, but they took that road anyway. And that road meant if Homalco, like a guy named Jim Bowen, he buys lands in logging areas where you have to cut through his land and everybody pays him for using his land to cut through there. Homalco was gonna have to pay him $600,000 before that slide happened in Southgate. And so that kind of money is being made out there, but was denied to Homalco all the way back to the 60s and even before that. And so I always felt like we should not have had to trade to get the land, the reserve where we're at, because it was the government that forced us out of Church House. When they forced us out, they should have given us a land base to move to, not just push us out, and that was it. So there's, I think there's going to be some work in reconciliation to be so that the government will have to pay us back for doing that to us. It caused a huge disruption, and I think it became a big part of the 60s scoop when they pushed everybody out to Paul River, Vancouver, and here. Lost a lot of kids in apprehensions and stuff. And then I think part of our problem now is that for every funeral, we have to put a lot of money into funerals. And think around $15,000 for funerals, when in Church House it was just like the men went to dig the hole and they buried them in there. Here we have to buy plots up at the cemetery. So I think some of those things we will have to be reconciled, I guess. You know, there's a lot of things that really messed up our people. I think our ability to, as much as we're kind of in an urban area, we're still remote. There's a lot of people that don't have vehicles, and it's always difficult. And I think part of our issues now is the drugs have become much more accessible into our community, into our neighboring communities from Cape Mudge and Campbell River. So the drugs are kind of cycling through each community. And we tried to have discussions with Cape Mudge and Campbell River, and we said we all have the same problems. We should be working together to address the drug dealers and the drug issue. So I think at some point it'll come. I think when we get enough money, we will have our own police force that we can deal with this stuff in our community. Because right now, sometimes the police are saying, when people phone the police, they say, phone your chief and council. And I was asking, well, when people from downtown phone you, do you tell them to call the mayor? It doesn't make sense. So they just don't want to do their job. So we'll, at some point, have our own police force.
Great. That would be awesome. What community milestones over the last century stand out as symbols of resilience?
Well, I think the reserve, when they acquired the reserve up there,
Right.
I think Richard went through a lot of work to get that reserve. You remember him telling the story one time. He said they went to Vancouver Indian Affairs and people will be trying to close the doors when they're coming. Same thing going to Ottawa, trying to close their doors when they're coming to ask that reserve be turned into, that 160 acres be turned into a reserve. So I think that was a big building block for us here in Campbell River. Then I think the start of the bear tours was an important milestone. And our own logging company was important. It wasn't successful, but it gave us the taste for developing our own economy. And now I think as we go forward, Robert and I were in Vancouver when we negotiated a hydro deal. You know, it was when we first started negotiating the deal, they were offering us 20% of the entire hydro project. Then we got to 30%. And finally I went to meet with Donald and said, Homalco's line is ownership. And I remember him telling me a couple of times, once in Victoria, that Homalco will never own it. Then at that lunch we went to with him, Preston and I went to him, and he said, Homalco will never own it. He said that again. So we walked away. We were away for about 3 months. And we had another guy come in, and he wasn't going to get the job done. So I talked to Robert, Preston, and council, and we said, we can still negotiate with Donald. And as soon as we went back, he offered us 50% of the hydro project. And that made more sense to me because we didn't have $10 to $14 billion that we could access. So we had to rely on the investors, but they couldn't do it without our rights, our consent. So it was our true partnership. So we went to 50-50. But as soon as all the bills are paid off on the hydro project, our ownership jumps to 66%. So we'll have 2/3 of the hydro project. And at some point, we will work towards that ownership of that project. And I think when we finished that meeting, some of our board of directors says, you have changed Homalco's future forever. And I believe that. I think it's going to be a huge change.
Positive.
And, yeah.
Oh, yes.
And I think we need to be, but we have to be ready as well. We have to hang on to our culture. We have to be still generous, helping others. I remember when COVID hit, and the Namgis their meat cutter got COVID, and they were running out of meat in their community. So Homalco got a hold of some meat supplier here in Campbell River, and we paid for $25,000 worth of meat and sent it up to them. That's what I'd like to see us continue doing, because that's who we are. You know, your hais kaimuk means you give, you help, generous. Those things I think are something that we have to hang on to. We don't become arrogant and think we're better than anybody else just because our band has money. And I don't want to be like Kobima, where drug dealers are moving in. That's why we need our own police force to keep the drugs out and give our kids, build up a lot of resilience in them. That's what the culture is doing. The work that Dominic's doing is that resilience from drugs, keeping our kids away from that. I think those things will put us on a good path going into the future.
Definitely.
Another thing that was beneficial was our hatchery.
Yeah.
Because started with Richard and I forgot that guy's name.
Tiggeris. Yeah.
And it's, of course, there was a disaster when the wind blew it down, but we're starting to bring it back up again. And hopefully that'll get, we're talking to some guy that builds this kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And last week I had a meeting with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, not the right group I wanted there, but there's a better group. And they're talking about all the salmon that's way up, they're big, huge salmon up way up the Homalco River or Homalco Valley somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And then one of the things that was really encouraging, one guy says, you wouldn't believe how much water is up there. There's just a ton of water, and that's the good news for the hydro project.
Oh, yeah.
So we're moving forward in that one, too. So there's a lot of different things we're doing. Some of it is starting, but some of it is growing really good and bringing a lot of good people in to help.
Definitely.
I remember when I used to be envious of Clarence Louis and Osoyoos.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he had his winery and he had all this land by the lake, and it's thinking, well, what do we have? What do we have to do business with? It can't be just forestry. And then, I was really disappointed when we lost our opportunity for our resort. We had a $100 million resort when I was chief, and they were going to give us an additional 500 acres across from Orford on that point there. And the guy that was investing with us was he would, on that 500 acres, we would build homes for maybe $1-2 million. And those homes would be leased off to rich people for $9-11 million. We're going to build about 10 homes like that. And then that money we make from that would pay for our resort, and it would pay for the investor to make his money. That investor would be out in 6 years, and then we would be, the other partner in that would have been Rosewood. Rosewood Hotels, they're like a 5-star resort. They were going to come in for 35 years and be a partner and have all their expertise be part of that. And we would lease our land to them. We would lease the 500 acres to them. And I think it would have really solidified our ownership in Orford, would have given us a really strong foothold in there, but it got canceled. And that's always been one of my big regrets. We lost out on a $100 million resort. But when this hydro project came along, and I was pretty disappointed to see they didn't even mention Homalco people in there. There was just a couple of draft dodgers in Homalco that was there. They mentioned them, but there was really no mention of Homalco. So coming back at it in this time, I think is really when our title is so strong. We have a huge opportunity there, and I think we're going to be, within the next 3 years, we'll be building, and I'm really excited about that. We'll have into 4 bought up, and all the road right-of-ways to the dams, to the micro-hydro. So we're looking at huge opportunity for Homalco. And they're talking about it in treaty. They said Homalco is going to have a huge windfall, financial windfall. That's why I think it's important for us to get a handle on this, on our culture, that our culture is strong, that we're generous, we're Ishinomut. But when I was in Toronto about 2 months ago, there was tribe there called the Ute tribe. And I remember when I first heard of the Harvard Project, they had 20 million in oil royalties. And they took that money, they hired all the top investors, brought them in, and then they started investing their money. You should have seen a picture of their little house. Looked like a res house. Then next thing you know, the picture is a big, long office building, probably about 2-3 blocks long. Wow. And they're still growing their money. And I think when Trump is gone, we'll probably take a run down and see how the Ute tribe's doing, because they're now worth $3 billion. And then I think about how our investment will go, like every 7 years, your investment doubles. So we're going to work on the compounding. So if they have $3 billion, 7 years, it'll be $6 billion. 7 years after that, it'll be $12 billion. Then 7 years after that is 24 billion, 48, 96 billion. So that kind of, they call it a permanent trust fund. That just, and they only have 1,100 people. Can you imagine dividing up 3 billion or 50 billion, 100 billion?
Yeah, I can imagine.
So that's, but once everything's paid for on the hydro, it'll make like 500 million a year.
Nice.
And so that kind of investment for us will be easy. And if we get a long-term purchase agreement from BC Hydro, we will have money we can count on for 100 years or 150 years, and we invest the hell out of that, then just make sure our future generations are good. They have a permanent trust fund, and they have an administrative fund that deals with all their expenses they have as a community, education, health, and everything, housing. All those things are covered in the administrative fund. So this one just keeps growing. So every 7 years, you double it.
So you can invest in it too,
Be
right?
crazy. That'd be crazy.
Or people can invest in it. Remember you talked about
Yeah,
that?
yeah. There's lots of our community members can invest it, and I think the tax alone, Homalco will get about 40 million a year,
Nice.
and then after that, once the project gets going, then there's the sale of the energy. So the initial part of that sale will be to pay down the debt that cost to build it.
Yeah.
But at some point, like I said, once you get to the 500 million a year, it'll be all paid off. It'll be just like, I can't even imagine what that money looks like for us.
Yeah.
Hope it doesn't destroy us.
Yeah.
Well, just for that, I would live till 100.
Yeah.
Exciting times for sure. I can't wait to see that all unfold. Well, everyone, that concludes episode 3 of our 4-part podcast series. Join us next time for episode 4, which is going to be about today and tomorrow of Homalco. Thank you, Darren, Dominic, and Rob, for everything today. And a special thank you to our sponsor, Community Fund Radio of Canada, for making this podcast series possible. I am Eric Wilson from the Homalco Reservation. Thank you for listening. Imot.
You might.
Thank you.
Imot.
Yep.